want to pick up again on a couple of people, pull them out, and then we'll do a little closer examine of them. One that we're going to gets bypassed real often. And yet I'm not sure that that's right. Kind of a, I don't know, something, what's the term? Something in the grass. She's in history, she's part of history, but she is a she. And because she is a she, why, of course, don't pay her any attention. And I think maybe that's the problem, is that you didn't pay her any attention. So the first person I want to look at today would be Elizabeth Woodville. Now, Elizabeth Woodville is what you and I would call lower nobility. In other words, she's not of the Prince Duke caliber, okay? Her lineage is more like Viscount or maybe Lord of the Manor type thing. Yeah, she is lady, but she gets into history. Now, well, hang on, I'll get you there. First of all, we want to look at her lineage just a little bit. And what we've got here is a bunch, family, group of, let me call them progressives. They didn't necessarily abide by all of the social norms and rules. Yes? Woodville? Woodville. Ville. Okay. Elizabeth Woodville. Now, I grab onto her because she's born in a little village called Grafton Regis, which is about 5 miles from where my mother was raised. So I know her. I know Elizabeth because of the local. Don't forget. Her mother, Jacquetta of Luxembourg, obviously wasn't local. Luxembourg, well, it's an independent country, but yes, it's in that area. It is in the German. It's in the Holy Roman Empire, but for some reason, Richard Woodville got over there as a knight in what you and I would call the 100 Years' War. And one day, this Richard was ordered to escort, chaperone, Jacquetta, 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 to England. Well, you know what? While he was escorting, while he was chaperoning, the two fell in love and stopped at a wayside rest and got married. So when they got to England, Richard, being a lowly knight, did a no-no. And so whoever Jacquetta was supposed to be married to got stood up. And if she was coming from Luxembourg, she was supposedly going to marry somebody of the upper echelon. But obviously, because she married Richard, the king at that time was Henry V. And he levied a fine of 1,000 pounds on them because they got married. Now, 1,000 pounds. That's like 4 years' income for a night. The figure is somewhere between $500 and $600. $300 and $400 a year income for a lowly knight on his manor. Okay? That's based upon something, again, I'm pulling from another place and I'm using the figures from Sulgrave Manor, which is another Northamptonshire manor house, but it's the manor house of George Washington's family. And they, during the 1440, 1450, 1500s, were going to assume that the income off of a small manor might reach 500, but it's more like the 400 pounds a year. Well, if the king levies a 1,000-pound fine, he's levying like a 2.5-year total income fine. Not just the taxes that you'd pay, but total income, what today we call gross national product. So Jacquetta and, what was his name, Richard, were frowned upon. They were naughty people. And this goes down in history then as a court scandal. And because of it, the couple is on the outs. The king levies that type of a fine because you got married. You don't get back into the king's good graces. Okay? So any child born of that couple would have a black mark against their name because of their parents. Not because of anything they did, but because of their parents. All right? Now, Jacquetta has children, and the one I want to follow up on, her name is Elizabeth. Now, there are others. Woodville is the daughter of Richard and Jacquetta. Okay. Now, being of lowly rank and being who she was and the black marks against the family, Elizabeth was offered a match, and the parents took it. So we know that she was married at age 15 in 1452. She married John Gray of Groby, Groby. Now you can look all you want to in the atlas, and you will not find a Groby. Groby is one of those little villages that just ceased to exist. It just disappeared. So that tells you how big it was. But I can tell you where it was, and I can tell you who he supported, and that's more important because he supported the Lancastrian family, not the York. Grey, yes, Grey supported York. Grey supported Lancaster, excuse me. And they did have 2 sons. In 1461, Grey lost his life. And Elizabeth is now a widow at age 24. And the question is, how or what is she going to do? Remember, when you're defeated in these battles, all of Groby's land was given back to the king or whoever won the battle. We're going to assume it was the king. And so all of John Grey's land and titles went back to the king, and here is this woman, Elizabeth, with no means of support, no home, no roof over her head even. Age 24 with 2 sons. Now, there are as many lore, legend stories about these people as, well, there's twice as many as there are facts. The story says that she stood beneath an oak tree waiting with her 2 boys, hoping that the king would pass by in desperation. She sought to petition him for the reinstatement of her lands, yet got far more than she bargained for. That sounds like it's straight out of Grimm's fairy tales. Somehow, and that's the word I choose to use, somehow Elizabeth Woodville met Edward V. Okay? We don't know how. Now, this is where I want to give Elizabeth a lot of credit. Fourth. Edward the Fourth. As I say, how they met, who introduced them, we don't know. That's really not that important. What is important is that somehow, using all of her charms, she enticed Edward into marrying her without telling his parents. So she would have married Prince Edward. Now, there is this rule, and I'm sure you've heard of it. You saw it not too long ago. When Harry wanted to get married, he had to ask permission of the Queen. Yeah, well, that's the same rule. It's that old. But you see, what happened is that Edward didn't ask Daddy permission. Edward went to a small, out-of-the-way chapel, bribed a small, non-important priest who performed the ceremony quietly and didn't say anything, and Eddie sat on it for 2 months. What Eddie didn't realize at this point, or at that time, or maybe he did realize and he didn't give a damn, one or the other, and I think I know which of the two I prefer. Neville, the kingmaker, was trying to negotiate a marriage for Edward, and did. But Edward, of course, was already married. So when Edward got around to telling everybody he was married, oh, they were upset. Now, you can't levy a fine against a prince, but you can bet it would have been more than the £1,000 that Elizabeth's parents got fined. But you see, it runs in the family. The mother, the daughter. What this single action does, however, though, is it upsets Neville so much, our kingmaker, our Earl of Warwick. It upsets him so much that he actually, in time of peril, changes sides. And he will eventually become Edward IV's enemy. He will leave the Lancastrian side, and he will become a Yorkist. That's big. That's major. Because that also amounts to Warwick's downfall, because nobody trusted him either. You were over there last week. Why are you over here this week? Because the king got married and I couldn't do what I wanted. We just don't know what color his hair was. Yeah. Now, it is known that Elizabeth was a great beauty and may well have unsuspectingly dazzled the king into his proposal of marriage, as contemporary reports say. I don't know. What I do know is that this woman had a long way to fall. And she saw an opening, and she used it. I'm not going to blame her for it. Good for you. Okay? But after her parents' scandalous marriage, well, this secret one on 1st of May, 1464, it just blew up. It wasn't done. Nobody does it. And the Earl of Warwick, as we've said last week, was an extremely powerful man. When the king announced to the court that he had in fact already wedded a commoner, and the widow of a Lancastrian no less, I love this word, the Earl of Warwick was gobsmacked. Gobsmacked, gobsmacked. Now, I could take time and define that, but I don't think I have to. All right. Now what we've got is a woman with a foothold and 11 brothers and sisters. Remember, there were 2 by the previous marriage. And then she, yes. So in total, big family. And because she is now, and I've got to phrase it this way, I'm sorry. She is the wife of the king. I cannot say she's queen because the country never accepted her as queen. She was always the wife of the king. But she built an army around her of her relatives. When position opened up, it was almost always a Woodville that got the position. When a landowner died without heir, the land almost always went to a Woodville. She built, figuratively, if not actually, a wall of impenetrability around her. Okay? So, we look at her and we say, well, this is all good, this is all well and good, this is all great, except that what she was doing also is she is doing things for the common good. A little place called Cambridge University, maybe you've heard of it. Once you go there, there is a college there that is called Queen's College. That's hers. She paid for it. She endowed it. You go to Queen's College, you're going to the college founded by Elizabeth Woodville. Now we have a problem. And I'm spending time on this because it is the whole video for today. And it gets deep in a hurry. All right? The king, as you may recall, dies. And you look on your sheets, it goes to Henry V, and then it goes to somebody else, and it goes. Anyway, the point is that what happens here is that the person who inherits is Elizabeth Woodville's son, very young son. Elizabeth Woodville, when she built that wall around her, fenced out one of the king's brothers. His name was Richard. And what happens is Richard hates his sister-in-law so much that he actually goes to Parliament and lobbies in Parliament to have Elizabeth's and, of course, her husband, the king, he lobbies to have the wedding annulled. Because the wedding that Warwick had negotiated was signed on paper. And tradition says that when that paper was signed, which was before it was announced that Edward had married, tradition says he was married on the date that that document was signed. Therefore, the wedding to Elizabeth, well, no, it was bigamy. And that's the charge that Richard levied against Elizabeth and the dead king once it was to the point where Elizabeth's son was to be king. Now that action on the part of Richard erases the legitimacy of all of the children from that second wedding. So none of the children from Elizabeth Woodville / Edward IV were deemed legitimate. Parliament ruled that they were not legitimate. Parliament said the second marriage, which occurred in the little chapel in Iowa, never occurred. And that all of the children were illegitimate. And therefore, the king apparent In other words, Elizabeth Woodville's son is illegitimate and cannot be king. And it would have to go to the king's brother instead of the king's son. Richard is the king's brother. It should go to him. Now, this is where it gets sticky, and this is where politics are fun. As if we haven't seen enough of it recently. With that action, none, zero of the children from that marriage were deemed legitimate. None of them could inherit the crown by that parliamentary action. Now, later on, Richard steps down from his regency seat and says, well, since these children are illegitimate, I am king. The question which inevitably comes up, and it is now, I think, a 500 or 600-year-old mystery, is what happened to the king, who was a young boy, I believe 10 years old, and his brother, who was 8. They both disappeared. If I do that, then I don't have to show you the videotape. No, you're right. These two boys are called the princes in the tower. Okay. But the real question is this. Since both of those boys had been stripped of title, they could not have inherited the crown. All right? That's a given. That's law. That's in the books in Parliament. There is a faction in British history that is trying to rewrite the books for Richard III. They say he's not an evil man, he's this, he's all this plus, plus, plus. And then, of course, there are all these people that say, oh, no. And you're going to hear a lot of that on the tape. The question that I have to put forth, why? You see, Richard III, as soon as Parliament passed that legislation, and please understand, this is the way it works. This is not something we're making up. The instant that Elizabeth II dies, Charles is king. He's not crowned, but he's king. Instant. So the instant Parliament passed that law, Richard was king. Why, and this is the part of that mystery, why then would Richard have the two boys killed? He didn't need to. Well, now let's go back a few hundred years. Okay? Let's go back a few hundred years to Canterbury, to King Henry II. And I remember him standing there on the altar, and he said, "Will no one release me of this menace?" And he was talking about the Archbishop of Canterbury. About a month and a half later, 3 knights from France, fully encased in chainmail and armor, entered Canterbury Cathedral and slew the Archbishop of Canterbury, Thomas Becket. He said, I don't know, I couldn't have written a script. He says, well, yeah, I said that, but I didn't mean it. I didn't mean what I said. They took it farther than I wanted them to. If you haven't heard that in the last month. Maybe Richard did not realize the value of his voice. But I cannot believe, knowing, and I have edited this story down massively, but knowing the hatred between Elizabeth Woodville and Richard, because Elizabeth Woodville had a long way to fall. She would have fallen from, well, think of it, Queen of England to somebody who owns 10 acres of land and 5 cows. Now that would be a long fall, because she would have nothing. You see, even as it was, because her husband had preceded her in death, the crown went to her son, and her son would take care of her. And that's cool. But then people say, well, what did Richard do to her? And somebody asked a similar question here earlier. What happened to Elizabeth Woodville? She hung on, let's just say, to a friend. And that friend would be Lady Margaret Beaufort, Beaufort. And you're all going to say, who's she? Well, she's the king's mother. Which king? One coming up next week. Okay. So yes, she may have had some rough times, but what she ended up doing is befriending the queen. And the two of them were very instrumental in the rearing of Henry VII. Or if you prefer, grandmother to Henry VIII. Okay? Yeah, there you are. There you go. Very good. All right. All right. So, that's why I bring Elizabeth Woodville to you. Now, also, I want to spend just a little time with Richard, because Elizabeth and Richard are same time, same place, almost looking for the same square foot of ground. Is this the same Richard III that dug out of the parking lot? Yes, it is. Well, yeah. Well, no, that's Richard I. We got to give you that one. But this is Richard III. But it's just, if I go quickly through and end the story and then come back, please. Okay? We've got Richard III. And Richard III, the real question is, should he have been king or not? You know, what did he do with the 2 boys? These are questions. And then he goes into battle against someone named Henry VII, and we'll explain him next week. But he goes into battle against Henry VII and is defeated. And that ends the War of the Roses. And the winner allegedly picks the crown out of a bush at the battlefield, picks it up, or has one of his men-at-arms pick it up, and places that on his own head and crowns himself king. Now, this is done because that's the way it was done. This is called defeat. This is called you lose it all, and I am now king. And this man is Henry VII. Now, can you understand, please? Henry VII, Henry VIII, okay? Let's just go down the line. I'm going to skip his son Edward because Edward really doesn't do that much. So then we go to Mary Tudor and Elizabeth I and James. And who's our man? Who else do we know of in that same period of time with James from the same geographic area? As a matter of fact, 7 miles down the road. William Shakespeare, who writes on this period of time. And there is a play entitled Richard III. There is a part 1 and part 2 of Henry VII, Henry VI. Okay? That's why I said the Hollow Crown. It's a 3-disc package. If you can check it from the library or something. If you can stand Shakespeare, this is what we're talking about. It's this period of time. And you'll see the interplay between them. But you get the other side from Shakespeare. Why? Shakespeare is looking to preserve himself. How does he preserve himself? By getting income. Where does he get income from? Well, ideally the king. And his troupe is called the King's Men. And Shakespeare writes these plays. And in these plays, Henry VII is made to look like the Star of Bethlehem, glowing, shining, perfect man who defeats a devil, Richard III. Now, maybe he was seen that way in his time, and maybe he wasn't. We don't know. Fran has already referred to the fact that his body was found in a parking lot. Well, yes, it was, but no, it wasn't.
Well, at that time, it wasn't.
When he was buried, it was a church. And so he was buried in the church. The church fell down from lack of care, and all of a sudden, let's tar this over and make a parking lot. But they did find him, and now he's in a church. Okay? Yes. You big fight. A big fight over tourist dollars to come and see the king. Now, if I may, you know I love this website because what happens is it inevitably provokes anger. Quora. Why didn't Richard III kill his nephew Edward Plantagenet, the son of his brother George, Duke of Clarence, and the future 17th Earl of Warwick? The reason why I ask this question is because Richard was alleged to have killed his 2 nephews. Okay, so now we're going, okay, yeah, okay. But what they're asking about is way out here. Okay, not this brother and not this brother, but this one and his children. Well, they're out so far along the line that they don't matter. Okay? So this person that they're asking about, son of his brother George, Duke of Clarence, the future 17th Earl of Warwick. Well, I don't worry about the 17th Earl of Warwick because when Warwick was killed, his land and title were given to somebody else. So, I mean, that's just the way it is. Yes? Vat. Well, it's, yeah. Now here is one of the responses. I'll try and do it justice. Richard III had no reason to kill any of his nephews. The sons of Edward IV by Elizabeth Woodville had been declared illegitimate by the Archbishop on the grounds that their father was betrothed to Eleanor Butler at the time, and the betrothal with tokens had the force of marriage. Richard was therefore the next male heir and legal king. Only after his death, killed in battle by Henry Tudor, was there a problem. Henry's claim to be the Lancastrian heir through the legitimist line and a low marriage to mere gentlemen had to be bolstered by a marriage to the Yorkist heiress, Elizabeth, Edward IV's daughter. But if she was legitimate, so were her brother. If they were alive with a better claim as males, there was every incentive to get rid of them at this point. The Earl of Warwick was the next male Yorkist heir, so he had to go too. Henry Tudor was an excellent king, so it worked out well in the end, but he was the one who needed the useless boy princes dead. So you have to consider the end justifies the means. And who was it who claimed Richard killed the two princes? Henry Tudor said it. And his very efficient PR machine. That's who. So what they're doing is they're moving it down the line. Henry the Sixth. Henry the Seventh, right? Here he is. Let's see what it's got. Elizabeth of York. Yes. That's right.
So Elizabeth and Richard had two boys and a daughter. Are you saying that?
Among others, yes.
Oh, they did have more children, not just those two.
Well, but once you get 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, right, and it was the oldest son and his older brother, 10 and 9, I believe 10 and 8 or something to that effect, that were in the tower. Now, by the time you get down beyond that, there may have only been 1 or 2. And remember, it only happens, it's only of any importance because the king himself is dead. So there aren't going to be any more added to the list. And if there is a girl, you got a 10-year-old boy and a 8-year-old boy, and then you bring in this girl.
And she was in Elizabeth also.
Yeah.
But she's the one that married Henry VII.
Henry VII, that's right.
She was Henry VIII's mother.
Yeah.
She was a nice lady.
Tell me you don't keep it in the family.
Yeah.
Well, what's the word? Nepotism? Yeah. All right. Now, the points that are brought out are very valid. That Richard may not have. But as an outsider looking at a chessboard, I can see where someone would say, well, we can always take out Richard III because he's that hunchback. And FYI, he was a good knight because his armor straightened up his back and he could ride a horse because of the armor. It was like an exoskeleton. So we have a very valid statement here. We're saying, hey, he was a good guy. He didn't need to. There was no reason to. And from the outside, looking in, you would say that. But what the next piece of this says is that Henry VII recognized Richard's weaknesses, but they couldn't just take out Richard, because if the two boys were still alive, it would revert back to them. So the person who gains the most is Henry VII. And that's an argument that is used by the people of the Richard III Good Character Society. They're saying that Richard III was blackwashed and that you have been brainwashed by William Shakespeare.
There was something like that with Arthur, King Henry VIII, son Arthur. He was to marry, and someone else, and they actually killed him off, or killed her off, so that I gotta go back and
You may have a couple of things confused, Fran. Just know Arthur died of pneumonia.
yeah, he did.
Okay, in Wales, and the wife, Arthur's wife, becomes Henry's wife. Okay, I mean, this is Catherine of Aragon. So, yeah. Well, know this, know all of this, that this documentary, this narrative, I want to call it, because I don't know how much fact there is in it, was written down at the time of Henry VIII by Sir Thomas More. He's the one who wrote the story of the War of the Roses. And it is More's version then, and it's written during the time of Henry VIII, so you got to get Henry VII in there, and then Henry VIII, so you got to have a few years past. You got to have at least 40 years past, maybe as many as 60, before Moore sits down and puts quill to paper, quill to parchment. And this is the version then that Moore writes, but Shakespeare uses to base his play on. Okay. Now, I know you all played telephone at one point in life. So is everything that Moore wrote correct? Are all of the interpretations of Shakespeare of Moore's writing correct? We just don't know. We know that the two boys, and I can't remember how far this goes. We know that there were bones found in a remodel of the Tower of London. Two children's skeletons were found. We also know that under great pressure, Westminster Abbey gave permission for a DNA test on these bones. Now I'm jumping up to like 2015. We know that the bones have the right DNA in them. We cannot prove who the skeletons are. Now, if the DNA matches up, some people are very quick to jump and say, well, it's the princes in the tower, we found them. Maybe. We need more than that. Now, if you go to, I don't know which book I got two more. I got 5 books on the War of the Roses, and I brought 2 of them here, and there's 3 more somewhere. But if you go to the right book, there's a whole scientific story on why the scientists believe. But what is really important to me is the stand of Westminster Abbey. The DNA tests were taken once, and those bones will never be seen again. The Abbey has taken the stand that they are now sacred, and that those remains will never be opened again. At Westminster. At Westminster. Well, they're there, but because things are getting crowded, a lot of it now is going out to Windsor Castle, St. George's. Richard III's bones are interred in a small cathedral not too far from where they were found. Just because, yeah, well, there was a cathedral, and the cathedral a little further down the road said, I'm not sure how the hierarchy of all this works, but we are the governing body for that little congregation. That little congregation shouldn't have the bones, we should. I suppose it's kind of like St. Paul saying we should have something rather than St. John's and Hopkins. Okay? I'm guessing. But it didn't happen. It actually went to, I don't know, it's Episcopal Church, so I don't know how it got ironed out. But somehow they got a ruling that the body is with the little chapel. Probably because the little chapel needed the money worse than the... But actually they were still Catholic then at that time. This is, they're... When it happened, you are correct. They were still, they were Catholic. Actually, they would say they were Christian. The word Catholic doesn't come about with a capital C until the Reformation. And you got to get to Henry VIII for that. Clear as mud? Clear as mud? Okay. Clear as mud, but it covers the ground. Okay, so what are you going to see? You're going to see all of what we've talked about played out. And it's like, we'll teach it to you a second time. But I know how complicated it gets with everybody having the same name. So, no, they don't carry Roman numerals. You are quite correct. All right? So we'll have a go at this, and we'll learn about the princes and Tar next week. Because of the way this chooses to break the story up, there'll be a little bit of Bosworth Field, which is where Richard III died, and then they will go into a little bit of Henry VII. Okay, the man who actually. Is he Welsh? Yeah, well, sort of. And yes, he did marry the right woman. He married a woman from across the fence, and that united both the red rose and the white rose to the point where now they have a single rose with both red and white petals. And that's the rose now. It's now called the Rose of Henry VIII. They've changed their again. So the Tudor Rose. Richard III wasn't king for very long, just a couple of years. That's right. That's right. Richard III was not king for very long. You are correct.
Nearly 600 years ago, England was torn apart by a series of bloody battles for the throne. In just 30 years, the crown changed hands 7 times. Tens of thousands were slaughtered. It was one of the most turbulent and violent periods in British history. It's known as the Wars of the Roses. The most infamous story in the entire blood-soaked era happens 20 years after the Wars of the Roses begin. The slaying of two innocent young boys. The princes in the Tower. In the late summer of 1483, 12-year-old King Edward V and his 9-year-old brother Prince Richard are murdered, here at the Tower of London. It causes such outrage, such hatred, that it topples a king and brings down the longest ruling dynasty in English history. The man responsible was almost certainly the prince's uncle, Richard III. This is a controversial and bloody tale in which Richard is usually portrayed as the evil, homicidal hunchback hell-bent on stealing the crown. I'm going to show you a very different version of history. One in which the prince's death is far less simple, far less a comic book story of pure evil. Because the truth is, these deaths were the result of a violent clash of events and personalities that took place over a 6-month period, in which Richard's options narrowed to just one. Because in this world and at this time, the princes had to die. The heir to the throne is Edward IV's eldest son, the 12-year-old Prince Edward.
Again?
His guardian and tutor is his uncle, the Queen's brother, Anthony Woodville, Earl Rivers, a brilliant knight and scholar. The young Prince Edward hero worships him. They're as close as father and son. On the 14th of April, 1483, 5 days after the event, Rivers finally receives the terrible news. The prince's father, Edward IV, is dead. The burden of ruling England now rests on the shoulders of a 12-year-old boy. Uncle. Though he's yet to be formally crowned,
The king is dead.
the young prince is now King Edward V.
Long live the king!
But Edward will never have a coronation. In less than 4 months, he and Rivers will both be murdered. The man who will kill them is Richard, Duke of Gloucester, brother of Edward IV and also uncle to the new king. But in spring 1483, Richard is the total opposite of the hunchbacked Shakespearean baddie we've all heard of. Yes, he has a slightly curved spine, but he's also an English hero and a brilliant soldier. Richard's tamed the rebellious North and crushed the Scots for his brother Edward IV. He's been admired and trusted by his men and by the King of England. He's in his lands in the north when news of his brother's death reaches him. When Richard hears of his brother's death, he comes to York and changes into the black clothes of mourning, and he attends a memorial service here at the minster where he weeps for his dead brother. Richard now sees it as a duty of loyalty to carry out his brother's final wishes. According to a contemporary source, Edward IV's will made Richard Protector of England. This would give him control of the country until the 12-year-old king reaches adulthood. Richard's only goal now is to follow his brother's instructions and make this happen. In the days following the king's death, the country is temporarily in the charge of the Old King's Council in London. It's made up of some of the country's most powerful nobles. Lord Hastings is a senior member of the council. He's also intensely loyal to the late king. So Richard writes to Hastings immediately. He's relying on Hastings to make sure Edward IV's will is followed. Richard must be confirmed as Protector of England straight away. To Richard, this seems perfectly reasonable. He's the most senior adult royal, he's acting on his brother's last wishes, and he's an experienced decision-maker and a warrior. He can see what needs to be done, and he's quick, decisive, and ruthless about making it happen. But that attitude will also turn out to be his fatal weakness. Unfortunately for Richard, there's another source of royal power in England, one that doesn't care to stick doggedly to the old king's final wishes. The Woodvilles. The Queen, Elizabeth Woodville, and her family had a meteoric rise from second-class nobility to national leaders under the old king. They currently run the Navy, the Treasury, and the Armoury. But Richard's unlikely to dispense favours to the Woodvilles with the same enthusiasm as his dead brother. If he becomes Protector, the Woodvilles could be left with nothing.
Order, my lords!
Hastings does his best to do what Richard asks. But the Woodvilles aren't stupid. They have a majority on the council in London, and they use it. Instead of handing the keys of England to Richard as Protector, they decide that young Edward will start to rule immediately, with advice provided by the council, or in other words, by them. Richard will be powerless, and the Woodvilles are appallingly smug about getting one over on him.
'Tis true, my lord. We have such import that, even without the king's uncle, we may make decisions as we wish. From Richard's point of view, the Woodvilles are disrespecting the authority of his royal blood. These are not the sort of people who should be in charge of the new king. So he has two choices. He could suck up the disrespect, or he can do something about it. Now, Richard is brilliant at decisive problem-solving. That's what makes him such a great soldier. And now he has a problem to solve: the Woodvilles. Richard makes a fateful decision. He writes to Rivers, suggesting they all meet up on the way down to the coronation in London to show the unity of the whole royal family. That seems fair enough, but remember, Rivers is a Woodville. To Richard, they are now the enemy. Richard waits for them at Northampton with his right-hand man, Lord Buckingham.
Your Grace.
On April the 29th, 1483, leaving the young king in nearby lodgings, Rivers meets up with Richard.
All of us must, at some time, look to others for guidance and assistance.
He finds him, with his friend Buckingham, in a very convivial mood. Rivers has good reason to feel comfortable in Richard's company. Richard had recently resolved a tricky land dispute for Rivers.
My lord, it pleases me greatly that I could promote your cause.
Everything is going famously.
Gentlemen, good night.
They agree to pick up the young king in the morning and head to London together for the coronation.
Until the morrow.
But Rivers will never make it to London. Richard believes he's trying to do the right thing, acting on the wishes of his dead brother, Edward IV. In reality, by arresting the new king's uncle, Lord Rivers, one of the hated Woodvilles, Richard started down the road to disaster. Along with his henchman, Buckingham, Richard meets his nephew, Edward V, at Stony Stratford.
Your Grace.
When it comes to his nephew, Richard's on uncharted territory. He spent most of his time taming the north for his brother, but Edward spent much of the last 10 years in Ludlow. So when they arrive here at Stony Stratford, they may be uncle and nephew, but in reality, they're as good as strangers.
We are all of us most grieved by the passing of our right and noble king. I bring further grave news, Your Grace. It concerns your uncle and his company, and his foul responsibility in the passing of your father.
Richard claims Rivers and his allies had a hand in the death of the young king's father, Edward IV.
The Lords Rivers and Grey cannot stand at liberty in the face of their great treason.
This argument doesn't go down well with the young prince.
My uncle is no traitor.
Edward's loyalties clearly lie with the Woodvilles, and Rivers in particular. To the young king, it's not Rivers' actions that look dangerously traitorous, it's Richard's.
It's easy to look at Richard's behaviour and see the seeds of tyranny, the arrests of Rivers and Grey, taking control of the young king. But actually, it turns out that it's not that simple.
The truth is revealed by an extraordinary book unearthed 80 years ago here at the Lille Bibliothèque in France.
And this is it. This is the only contemporary copy of a book by an Italian scholar called Dominic Mancini. And when it was discovered in the 1930s, it profoundly changed the way we think about Richard. Because Mancini is in England during 1483, so this is pretty much an eyewitness account, and it's an incredible privilege to be able to read it. The really interesting bit is here, because Mancini says that according to the common report, Hastings, who he calls Astinco, had advised Richard to come to the capital with a strong force, 40 manum. He said that if he did so, he'd be able to avenge the insults done to him by his enemies. And he said this would be easy if before coming to London, Richard took the young King Edward into his protection, curam, and under his authority. So Hastings is basically telling Richard to imprison Rivers and Grey and to snatch the young king from the Woodvilles. And that is big. Because far from secretly planning to become a tyrant, Richard's actually following the advice of one of the most respected and senior nobles in the land, and the best pal of his dead brother, Edward IV.
Of course, it's unlikely the young king knows any of this. It must look like Richard is pretty much committing treason.
For your protection, we must return with you to London.
Richard undermines his case even further by claiming Rivers' terrible crime was that he encouraged Edward IV's famously heavy drinking, and this killed him. Basically, Rivers committed treason because he got the old king drunk.
Now, that's a pretty pathetic argument, but Richard doesn't really care. His explanations are just window dressing for other people. He's going to do what he's certain needs to be done. If other people are too stupid to realise that, well, he's not especially bothered. Unfortunately for Richard, the young king sees straight through him.
To Edward, Richard's whole argument is a sham. He has total faith in the integrity of Rivers and absolutely none in Richard. This unswerving loyalty will ultimately seal the young king's fate. But right now, like it or not, he's in Richard's care. Richard and Buckingham take Edward to London.
Richard knows he has to restore some sense of normality, particularly because May the 4th, the day they all arrived in London, was the day originally scheduled for young Edward's coronation. Well, Richard's actions have clearly blown all of that out of the water. So on May the 10th, at a meeting of the council here at Westminster, he has the council very publicly announce a new date for the coronation, June the 22nd, 7 weeks away.
Mancini records that, sensationally, Richard also forces the council to proclaim him protector and regent of the king and the realm. He's got exactly what he wants. Richard has pretty much all the powers of a king, which is, after all, only what he believes his brother Edward IV's will demanded. He sends the young king to the Tower of London.
Your Grace, under my protection you shall be kept safe.
Now, it's true that the Tower is a royal palace, but in reality, the young king is under house arrest. He can't do anything Richard doesn't want.
Your Grace.
For example, help the Woodvilles. Young Edward will never set foot outside the Tower again.
Keep him free from harm, Your Grace.
There is, however, a catch to Richard's new powers. The council put a 7-week time limit on them. They cease on Edward's coronation. They clearly have serious reservations about Richard's behaviour.
This is the core of Richard's problem. His total self-belief has made him very effective in seizing power, but that same trait prevents him from realising that other people don't see the world the same way that he does.
The clock is ticking for Richard. To carry out what he believes are his dead brother's wishes, he must neutralise any opposition in the next 7 weeks.
Richard needs to move quickly against the Woodvilles, starting with the family patriarch, Earl Rivers. Rivers is the man closest to young Edward, and that makes him Richard's most dangerous adversary. Now, fortunately, Rivers is locked up at Sheriff Hutton Castle in Yorkshire, but as soon as Edward's crowned, he's guaranteed to release Rivers. And Rivers will make very sure that Richard's protectorate ends. So what started as a mission to secure his brother's legacy has become a grim and bloody fight for survival. He must now do whatever it takes to stop the Woodvilles from sweeping back into power and sweeping him straight to the scaffold.
Of course, most of Richard's problems would go away if Rivers should die for any reason.
My lords, I urgently petition you that Lord Rivers be charged with crimes most heinous against royal authority.
Richard demands the council try Rivers and his allies for treason because they were preparing to kill him, the Lord Protector. It's another of Richard's paper-thin arguments.
For this crime, they should be treated as traitors and suffer the traitor's fate. Death. What say you, my lords?
He doesn't much care if the council believe it, as long as they do what he wants. And he has Hastings and Buckingham fighting his corner.
Aye.
Aye.
But the council point out that since the ambushes would have taken place before Richard were Protector, it wouldn't be treason, even if it were true.
Nay.
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 Nay. Nay. Nay. Nay.
Nay.
But it's obvious that many on the council simply don't believe him. And that's hardly surprising. After all, Richard's locked up a senior noble, snatched the king, and forced the council to give him a protectorate. It's no wonder that, from their point of view, he is starting to look a little bit dangerous.
The young king's mother, Elizabeth Woodville, is certainly scared of Richard. She's fled to the sanctuary of Westminster Abbey with her children, including Edward's little brother. She's banking on the fact that religious sanctuary is a boundary no one dares cross. And no one has, yet. June the 9th. Richard has spent 5 weeks trying to force the council to support him. He's been blocked at every turn. He has just 2 weeks left. If he can't get Rivers, he's going after someone more vulnerable. He wants Edward V's little brother, 9-year-old Richard.
My lords, the Prince Richard, Duke of York, must be released into the care of the Protector, so he may attend the coronation.
Richard's got the king. What does he need with his younger brother? Well, I think all of this stuff about wanting the prince at the coronation just feels like one of Richard's flimsy excuses to do something else.
What say you, my lords?
Aye.
I think he realizes that the Woodvilles could use the prince's status to launch a new challenge to Richard's authority.
But if Richard controls the young prince, that problem will go away.
Nay. Nay.
Nay.
Nay.
Nay.
Hastings has been totally loyal to Richard, but this is starting to feel like treason. Richard's difficulties with the council stoke a growing paranoia. His henchman Buckingham pours fuel on the fire. He says Hastings is in secret meetings with Richard's opponents. There's nothing to suggest Buckingham is telling the truth, but that doesn't matter to Richard anymore.
From Richard's point of view, Hastings, one of a dwindling number of allies, has now betrayed him. The walls are closing in. Anyone, no matter who they are or how important, who looks like they could threaten his survival, will now be treated as an enemy.
It no longer matters if it's true or not. If Richard believes you've crossed him, you're a dead man.
Nay.
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 On June the 13th, with just 9 days remaining until the coronation, Richard attends a council meeting here at the Tower of London. Now, for most people, the coronation will mark the point at which normality is finally restored. But not Richard. For him, the coronation will mark his fall from power and a chance for the Woodvilles to hunt him down. So unlike everyone else, Richard arrives here with one mission: to stop the coronation. And his first step is to eliminate anyone who might stop him.
My lords, God give you good day.
Please, join us.
Please, be seated.
Richard has called a much reduced council meeting. He's included his staunch ally, Hastings, which is surprising considering Richard now suspects Hastings is working against him. The meeting starts well, but Richard's about to make another appalling decision.
My lords, I must briefly beg your leave.
Hastings is left wondering what on earth is going on. He doesn't have to wait long.
Treason! 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 Treason!
My Lord Buckingham, take Lord Hastings without.
My lord. Help me. No! My lord! My lord! My lord!
Buckingham has become Richard's devious lackey, prepared to do anything Richard asks. Hastings is executed in the yard outside. This is nothing less than a choreographed act of terrorism. Execution without a trial by your peers is a violation of basic English law. Richard claims Hastings committed treason by conspiring to kill him.
Treason is abroad in this country. We shall suffer no more of it.
To the rest of the world, the idea that the upstanding and basically honourable Hastings was doing anything so base is plainly ludicrous. But Richard's back's against the wall, and he's not thinking like the rest of the world. As far as Richard's concerned, throughout this whole mess, he's taken a series of unavoidable decisions to save the monarchy and to save himself. And in his mind, that's probably what he's still doing. But in reality, Richard's crossed a line, and there's no coming back. Whatever people actually think of his sham excuses, they're now cowed into silence by fear. Richard and his remaining ally Buckingham can now do pretty much whatever they want. But time is running out for Richard. The coronation is now just days away, and Hastings' death doesn't change the reality that the Woodvilles will still be coming for Richard. So what next? Well, in truth, there's only one scenario in which Richard isn't destroyed, and that's if Edward never takes the throne. But if young Edward isn't crowned king, then who is? From Richard's perspective, that's an easy question. Him. As far as he's concerned, he's just been trying to do what his brother wanted, and of course, keeping himself alive. I don't think Richard snatching the throne was inevitable from the beginning. I think it emerged from a combination of his own personality, his blinkered loyalty to his brother, and the rapidly flourishing hatred between him and the Woodvilles. And all of that drove him, one decision at a time, to the point of no return. On June the 16th, 6 days before Edward's due to be crowned, Richard moves against the young king's mother, Elizabeth Woodville. She's still sheltering inside Westminster Abbey under the powerful laws of sanctuary. Richard sends in the 80-year-old Archbishop of Canterbury, Thomas Boucher, to persuade her to give up her youngest son to Richard.
Elizabeth's staying at the abbot's house here at Westminster Abbey. The Archbishop visits to reassure her that Richard is simply doing his duty as protector, and that her younger son will have a pivotal role in the coronation.
Your Grace?
But it must be crystal clear to Elizabeth that if she doesn't comply, Richard won't hesitate to violate sanctuary and snatch the prince anyway.
After all, he's just murdered one of the country's senior nobles.
I believe you come with good intent. But is there truly any assurance you can give me for my son's protection?
Elizabeth's dilemma is acute. She not only has her little boy with her, but also her daughters. If she continues to resist, it's entirely possible Richard will kill them all. But if she hands over her son, there's at least a chance they'll all survive until her eldest son's coronation. Elizabeth folds. She hands her son into Richard's care. Richard immediately sends the little prince to join his brother in the Tower. The next morning, June the 17th, Richard postpones Edward's coronation by 4 months. After weeks of banging his head against the wall, Richard's finally getting people to do what he wants. Principally because they're terrified of him. Everyone's living in fear after Hastings' murder, and there are rumours that Richard's bringing 20,000 men south to London. No one dares to stop him. But his plan to snatch the throne is quite obviously illegal. So Richard gets his best mate to sell another flimsy and outrageous justification to the country. On June the 25th, Richard's ally Buckingham strides boldly in here to the Guildhall in London, and in his wake comes a party of lords and knights he's clearly assembled himself. Now he makes his way here to the east end of the hall and climbs up on a raised platform to address his audience. And he repeats a sensational and very convenient rumour that's been doing the rounds for the past few days. Edward IV's marriage to Elizabeth Woodville was invalid. Buckingham claims Edward IV was already contracted to marry someone else before Elizabeth Woodville. If that's true, under English law, Edward IV's children are illegitimate. None can rule England. Buckingham claims that only Richard has the legitimacy and the integrity to take the crown, which is a pretty tough sell. After all, we are talking about a man who's imprisoned 2 little boys, threatened to violate sanctuary, raise an army against the capital, murdered a senior nobleman, and is now very clearly usurping the throne. But Buckingham is effectively Richard's chief of staff, and he's an oily, untrustworthy man on the make. If he gets this right, he ends up being the new king's best pal. On the same day, Richard finally deals with Lord Rivers, one of his most dangerous Woodville opponents. After more than 2 months in prison, he's convicted of treason. But it's a sham trial, of course. Rivers isn't even allowed to speak. He's executed the same day. His body thrown into a common grave. With his main opponents dead or neutralised, the throne is Richard's for the taking.
This is the site of Baynard's Castle, a fabulous riverside mansion where Richard's staying. Literally, the day after Rivers' murder, Buckingham leads a hastily assembled, and I think rather scared, delegation of nobles, bishops and Londoners here to meet Richard. They meekly accept his claim that the princes are bastards and formally offer him the crown. Richard hesitates, theatrically. Should he accept? Is he the right man? Seriously?
The party heads to Westminster Hall, where they declare Richard king. In just 13 weeks, Richard has descended from noble defender of his dead brother's last wishes to a murderous tyrant. And he probably believes that every rash and violent decision was totally justified to save himself and the crown. But of course, Richard's not the only one with a claim to the crown. His rule will never truly be safe as long as his young nephews remain alive. July the 6th, 1483, only 3 months after his brother Edward IV's death, Richard, Duke of Gloucester, is crowned King Richard III of England. Having repeatedly violated the law, Richard now pulls a handbrake turn and starts trying to spin the image of a noble king. Everything is done by the book. Buckingham's unflinching loyalty to Richard earns him pride of place as Master of Ceremonies.
Long live the king!
Long live the king!
But sharper observers cannot miss one notable absence. Neither of his nephews, the princes in the Tower, are there. The two princes have been seen playing here in the Tower grounds, but on July the 9th, 3 days after his coronation, Richard dismisses all of their servants. They're never seen outside these walls again. Richard has them under close arrest. But he doesn't seem to have worked out what to do with them. Richard sets off on a tour of the country to calm tensions and show that there is a safe and reliable monarch on the throne. But while he's away, Richard receives worrying news. there's been an attempt to spring the princes from the tower. The plan was to set light to buildings across the city and spirit the boys away in the confusion. Richard's men grab the conspirators before they can act. But it's a stark reminder of how dangerous challengers for the throne are.
Sooner or later, someone will succeed in freeing the princes, and there's a fair chance that that person will kill Richard and replace him with Edward. So the truth is, if Richard wants to keep his crown, the princes have to die.
Sightings of the princes at windows in the tower persist for a few weeks after the plot to spring them is uncovered. Edward's physician visits the princes and reports that the young king is preparing like a victim for sacrifice. He's taking daily confession, believing that death is coming for him. He's right.
By early autumn, the princes have simply vanished.
There's no reliable record of their death. No bodies are found and no one is put on trial. But by September, almost nobody believes they're still alive. Rumours circulate that the boys have been smothered in their sleep, poisoned, even drowned in a vat of wine. The truth is, nobody knows. The one thing we can say for certain is that the person who benefits most from their deaths is Richard. Even though he started with the best of intentions, I think it's almost certain that he had them murdered. Richard's not done yet. In October 1483, his loyal crony Buckingham rebels against him. Richard has him executed. Richard will be the last of the Plantagenet kings that have ruled England for more than 300 years. Richard's nephews were pretty much the last of the line. Now, he is truly alone. Most previous Plantagenet kings have had a substantial royal family around them. Brothers, uncles, cousins, nephews, someone to keep the royal line going. But apart from his own son, Richard III, the 14th Plantagenet, has pretty much no one. His misguided attempts to secure the power of his own dynasty have ended up wiping them out. And along the way, he's been transformed from an English hero into a paranoid child murderer. All in just 6 months. Next time, the Wars of the Roses come to a bloody end as Richard III meets his fate. He's brought down not by a king or a nobleman, but by a brilliant and politically astute woman, Margaret Beaufort.
Yes. No, no. What has happened, and I can't say for sure, But many times when you start dealing with these, people say things and they aren't clear. And they think now that that came about because of this actual secret marriage. And they thought, well, who was it to? And then they got names crossed over and this, that, and the other. So, no, he was, according to all records and anywhere that they can find, that the Woodville is the important tie in first. But it's worth noting that a lot of historians put more importance on her than on him. They think he was actually not a very strong king, that he was dominated, I suppose, or that he didn't choose to make decisions. And I think that's probably closer to the truth. He had one goal, and that was he was going to bring peace. He didn't like the concept of the War of the Roses. He was going to bring peace, and because he was going to bring peace, because he was going to bring peace, he was ready to give. And when he started giving, of course, those in power didn't like it, and those who were coming to power liked it very much. And his concept of, well, if I give a little bit, everybody will behave, backfired. And so he ended up making old friends into new enemies, and old enemies into new friends, and all he did was swap sides, basically. Yes, Edward IV.
And then my other question, this was from week 1. You know you gave us
Uh-huh.
2. Are you going to cover that other one next week?
Well, I'm going to have to.
I just don't know if there's some significance to there being 2.
No, not really. The second one is applicable today, but not then. Okay. Well, as long as you can stick with me on it, Fran, yeah. Well, what I was afraid of when I started this period of time, these 40, 60 years, how far back you want to go, it is without a doubt because of the different names and the Roman numerals, it gets very confusing. And so you end up having to forget their names and know them for who they are, and then like a very wise youth minister I knew one time, he was going through the begats. Okay, Linda's saying, who begat whom? Okay, he was going through the begats, and he replaced them with Smith and Jones and Anderson and Johnson. And they made just as much sense then as they did with the real names, except that we could identify with, oh, that's a family, that's a family, that's a family. And I think if you can do that, that's why I gave you that sheet the first day, and who belonged to who, and who sired who, and all that kind of stuff. It's all well and good, but the name is so misleading because you've got an Edward who's a York, and then Edward who's a Lancastrian, and then you got Edward who's a Tudor. Well, if one family would hang on to one name, it'd sure be a lot easier. But they don't.
Well, this has been helpful to me to help kind of untangle the mess in my head about it. So
Good.
it's been good.
Good. Okay, well, clock on the wall says it's almost time. What we should do, though, is figure on wrapping it up next week. So if you've got questions, like Linda's, bring them. And I'm going to try and time it the same way that I did this one. So we'll have 5-10 minutes at the end of next week to take any questions on anything that we've talked about in the last 4 weeks, all right? Okay, well, I thank you for coming. Stay well, please stay well. And